Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's Ask Andrew show, Canada's first Facebook live streaming family law question and answer show. My name is Andrew Feldstein, and I'm the founder of Feldstein Family Law Group. We practice solely and exclusively in the area of family law with offices located in Markham, Vaughan, Oakville, and Mississauga. Our entire practice, as I said, is just family law. And today, I'm joined by one of our senior associates, Anna Troitschanski. Welcome to the show again, Anna.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So today's show, and it's our last one for 2023, and it's the month of December, so we thought we would dedicate it to challenges in family law during the holidays. To our lot of viewers out there, this may seem really obvious that there shouldn't be any challenges, and to other people, they may look at it and say they only wish they'd be so fortunate to look at it that it's an easy thing. So I wanted to start this off with, what are the normal type of challenges or difficulties that you see, Anna, at this time of year related to the holidays?
So there are several. I think the most obvious one is a holiday schedule. Unless the parents have a separation agreement or have amicably arrived at some sort of an arrangement over the Christmas holidays as to who gets the children over Christmas Eve versus Christmas Day, who gets the children for the New Year's days, there could be some issues that may arise during the holidays where they are not agreeing on the schedule that should follow. And it may not be the regular schedule, or the regular schedule that is in gear may not enable both parents to sort of share in the actual holidays. So that's one. The second one that often comes to mind is where one of the parents wants to travel with the children during this period and the other parent is not consenting to it. So, generally we need some sort of a consent form signed by the other parent to enable one of the parents to take the child out of the country. And one of the parents may refuse to do that. So that's sort of another issue that may come up.
Well, you actually had a lot of information in that short time, and there's a lot that we have to peel away at the layers. And I heard a few things. You talked about agreement versus no agreement. Can they arrange things? So the starting place for us of what's supposed to make life simpler for families is having an agreement. And like anything else, you can have lawyers who are going to draft an agreement with what I would say is the proper foresight in a way to avoid conflict at this time of year. Then you can have other agreements that are going to be ripe with conflict. What I mean by that is, what creates conflict? Well, usually our agreements will say that the regular parenting schedule is suspended and that a holiday schedule overrides it. And some people will put in because they think that they're getting along or they want to figure things out as they go, that says the holiday schedule will be determined as the parties may agree from time to time, or some words along those lines. That works great for people who are getting along. But just because you get along in 2023 doesn't mean you're getting along in 2028. And sometimes a new partner gets introduced, family members have quarrels, and now all of a sudden, you have a fight because each party saying they want Christmas Day, each party saying they want Christmas Eve. So I'm going to say it to you now, Anna. What's the best thing two people should do when they're negotiating their agreement with respect to something like the winter holidays?
Well, so generally we propose some sort of an alternate schedule where, in odd numbered years, a parent may have New Year's Eve versus New Year's Day, and then that sort of switches for the following year. And this sort of enables both of the parents to take part in whether it's, the opening of the presents in the morning or having the Christmas Eve dinner together. And neither parent feels that, the child is not having that opportunity with them. Because they're alternating that schedule. And I think it's very, very important to delineate in a separation agreement, whether it's an interim agreement or a final agreement, the specifics of that, leaving it to the parents to decide, as you mentioned, Andrew, may work, 1 year or in the beginning, but eventually may not. And unless you have something that's sort of reduced to a written arrangement, you're going to have a problem. You're going to either be bringing something urgent to the courts, or you're going to be spending some money on your lawyers to try and figure out what that arrangement should be.
Well, to take that one step further, what you're really saying is if you haven't crystallized in the agreement what happens on the holidays, you're going to have chaos. And chaos leads to one of two things. It leads to spending money, like you said, on lawyers. Or two, the alternative of what it does is one person digs in their heels, the person who has more power over the decisions with respect to the children, and they make the decisions and the other person capitulates, which isn't healthy either because that's going to lead over time to more conflict. Now, there are various ways that various families may deal with holiday parenting schedule. One way, probably the most common that we see, is much like Anna said, is we alternate. And the break we typically will alternate is split up into one person in odd years gets the first half, and in even years they swap it. So in other words, parent one gets the first half of the break in odd years, parent two gets the last half in odd years, and then in the even years they swap it. And if they celebrate Christmas, there'll even be a swapping within the period of time of Christmas with Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And I say if, I'm Jewish, so it made it really easy with doing my agreement because Christmas wasn't an overriding concern. So we just divided it, the holiday, in half, and we didn't need to do that additional swap in the beginning. Now, for some families, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day is critical, and that's why you do this kind of swapping within the swapping. It may limit vacations people can take, but what I hope our viewers were able to take away with that is the overarching typical norm of holiday parenting time is equality. It doesn't mean that the primary parent, who may be the primary parent year round, is going to get more time at the holidays. There is no presumption about that. Now, Anna, would you say, I wouldn't say there's a steadfast rule that says this is the way it's got to be done, because ultimately it's parents, and the parents can choose what they want to do in their agreement, but they need to appreciate they're going to be stuck with what they've chosen. So do you have any preferences when drafting an agreement of what you like to see in your holiday clauses?
Well, as I said, I do like the alternate component because I think it gives both parents an opportunity. When we talk about religion, for example, even if you don't necessarily celebrate Christmas or some of the holidays, you may still want the child during this time. I had a situation once where Easter was not an issue for either parent, but each parent still wanted to partake in the child's activities for the Easter egg hunt. It wasn't a religious component, but it's something that they wanted each to do with the child. And so I think we have to be cognizant of that. And holiday time is really a time where you really get to spend quality time with the child. Religion sort of aside and traditions aside, the children are not in school. Usually people are off of work. And this is an opportunity for you to really have that one-on-one, to enjoy activities together, to do things together. And I think you really need to think about that and try and arrange something where both parents can be part of that very special, very quiet time of the year, from the perspective of our crazy busy schedules. So I do like the equal split if it's feasible and it's possible and the parents are in the same area or close to each other and have the availability. And I do like to see that alternate schedule, because then neither parent feels like, well, it's not fair that one parent always gets that Christmas Eve or always gets that Christmas Day or always gets that New Year's Eve. Each parent has that opportunity, and the child feels like they have the opportunity to spend that time with each parent.
And of course, when you have that, it means that there won't be chaos. And one caveat I want to say, just because something is in an agreement doesn't mean the parents can't choose among themselves to do something different. It means that this is what the rules are if you can't agree. So one parent can write to the other side or call the other side if they're talking and say, I'd like to make a change this Christmas. I want to do something different with the schedule. How do you feel about it? There's nothing wrong with doing that. The parents can agree on it. I often say the best parenting agreement is the one that you never look at, because when you're looking at the agreement, it usually means there are lots of problems. And when a client tells me, I have the agreement, it's saved on my home screen on my computer so I can find it whenever I look, or I have a printed copy of it in my dresser drawer next to me because I got to look at it all the time. Well, you know their parenting regime is a failure. You just know it, because if you're having to rely on that agreement all the time, you failed. So I wanted to make sure that our viewers know, don't just have the knee jerk reaction of, this is what the agreement says, ergo we must do it. That's what you must do if you can't reach an agreement to the contrary. And typically, if you ask for indulgences, you got to remember that one day you're going to be asked, and you need to be fair and kind too, which is a nice segue into the other thing Anna talked about, which is travel. This is the time of year where in the next week or two, people start traveling. But there's a problem, because, Anna, what do you need to do when you're traveling with a child and both parents aren't traveling with that child or children?
Sorry, when both parents.
What do you need when you travel? One parent with the kids.
Well, you need a travel consent, which generally it's a notarized document, and you'd have to go see your lawyer, and it would set out on that consent where you intend to travel, what the itinerary is, flight informations, how long you plan to stay, where you can be reached, and that has to be notarized. The signature has to be witnessed and notarized by a lawyer. Generally, we always recommend that document be signed, and that the party traveling, especially when it's our client, has it with them. Sometimes, the security at the border will ask for it. Sometimes they may not, but you should have it in any event so that your spouse doesn't then allege that you unilaterally took the child out of the country, or, traveled without their consent.
And what I'll add is, on that particular point, he said, even if you think I've traveled and they haven't asked, I've said it many times on this show, I'm divorced, I have 2 kids, and I've traveled many times with them. I don't always take the travel consent out when they were under 18 to show to immigration, because I'm very curious as a divorce lawyer to see, do they ask? And quite frankly, on occasion, they've asked. Sort of the last time when my son was under 18, I thought it was funny because he was the one driving the car across the border. So I was really curious to see if they asked for a travel consent of a teenager who's driving. I had it because I thought it's worth it to have it, but they didn't. I'm not trying to say that to any of our viewers to say don't get it, but some people may have experienced it and said, well, they don't ask. They do. They just don't do it all the time. And do you really want to be that person who is standing in line at the airport after school is out with your kids, all excited to go on a trip that your spouse even knows about, and they say to you, sorry, we're not going to let you leave the country and board your plane because you don't have that travel consent? I can't imagine how rotten of a feeling that has to be. And with the current climate of how expensive vacations are, how disappointing that would be. So you mentioned one important piece, but then there's another important piece. It's the passport. So there are 2 things you need, obviously. You need the travel consent and you need the passport. Most agreements will say one parent keeps the passports and has to give it to the other parent. But the passport and or the travel consent can become tools of power. And this is why I encourage my clients to make their requests for their trips early. Because what happens if I say, for example, I have my child for the second week of Christmas break and I want to take them to Mexico to an all-inclusive, and my ex-wife signs a travel consent but doesn't give me the passport? I'm going to have problems traveling. So if I wait to the last second to get that and I don't get the passport, I'm not going anywhere. So you tell people early. Where you lead yourself to is having the ability to go to court and do something about it. So perhaps you want to explain, Anna, what that may look like.
Well, again, giving us time to address this is very important, because I'm sure most lawyers can attest to this. Urgent motions are not fun. They're stressful. You're running into court last minute. You're hoping that you will be heard in time. And they're not fun for the client either. You're being forced to gather all this information, and we're scrambling to get these materials out. So to avoid that, going back to what you said earlier, Andrew, address that passport issue in advance. Let us send out that letter a month or 2 months in advance saying, we expect this passport within, 15 days prior to the day that you have to leave. And if we don't have it by then, well, that gives us 15 days to address this with the court. And at that point, we would likely be bringing an urgent motion to the courts, seeking for the return of this document for the travel. And as I keep stressing, the earlier we can deal with it, the better, because if there is a set of circumstances where the court is unable to hear this motion for whatever the reasons may be, or denies hearing this motion, you're not going anywhere. You're stuck here, and you may have paid for your flight, and you have made the plans, and you may have paid for the hotel, for which you may or may not have cancellation insurance, and you're not going anywhere without that passport. I think it's even more critical than that consent form, from that perspective.
Well, and I'll take it down another place that people need to appreciate from the other parent who says, I'm not going to consent to the trip because they want that control and power. My response is very simple. If I'm saying I want to take my child on what would be a reasonable trip, what do I mean by that? Well, you don't necessarily want to take the children to a war zone where there's a travel advisory by the government of Canada not to go. That would be foolish. And the other parent would be well within their rights to say, I'm not going to consent and I'm not going to give a passport. But if a parent is saying, I want to take my child to an all-inclusive, and I'll pick Mexico as an example, for a week, and the other parent wants to say no, to be obstinate, when I go to court, I'm not just going to ask to dispense with their consent and to get the passport. I'm also going to say that my client should now be the permanent keeper of the passport. And I'm also going to say that the other parent's consent should be permanently dispensed with. And I'm also going to ask for costs for all of my troubles. So there are negative consequences to trying to be punitive. The second thing you need to realize, in addition to those negative consequences, if that person doesn't take you to court, turnabout is usually fair play, and they're probably going to behave exactly the same way when you want to take your children on vacation. So be very guarded about it. I'm mindful of a story I once had with a client who wanted to take their child to a sporting event and arrange something at the last minute. And the other spouse demanded a travel consent for a trip that was about 8 months away. And there had to be an exchange with the child there outside one parent's home because that spouse was not going to give up the passport. And they ripped the travel consent from the other parent's hands. And only then did they allow the child to give the passport over to the other parent. I mean, that's sort of a really bad situation when it boils down to with a passport exchange. But the poor child was really stressed because they were looking forward to going on that trip. And their parent was saying to them, well, maybe you're not going to go, and holding the passport ransom and hostage. That parent needs to remember, who are they hurting?
And that's a really valid point, because at the end of the day, it's the children that will suffer. And as a parent, I think, at least on a conscious level, we do not wish to hurt our kids. This is an exciting time for them. This is a great opportunity most of the time. So unless there are safety concerns, why hurt your own child? There's a practical component to this. They should be able to go. They should be able to enjoy the trip, and you should keep your, feelings towards your spouse or any disputes that you may have between your spouse separate from that. One should not be connected with the other. So that is a horrible story that you had just relayed, Andrew, for sure.
And I sometimes will tell my own story. So there's one where my ex was supposed to take my kids out to an all-inclusive for a week, and my son got a fever the day before they're supposed to leave. And my ex texted me saying, can she move the trip back 4 days? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to lose a day or two with my kids over the holidays. And I think they came to my house for a little bit of time before they went away. But the point is, she wanted to take them on a trip, and I knew they were excited to go on the trip. So why am I going to want to punish them and make them sit at home in the cold city with me just so that they can sit with me, rather than them going on a vacation that I knew they wanted to go on? So I said, sure, go ahead, because I had to put my kids' interests ahead of my own and let them go enjoy some fun in the sun, which they did, and good for them. Those are things I'm saying to people you really need to be mindful of put the kids first. Don't try and be angry that the kids are going to go have a good time with your former spouse or your former spouse's new partner and their kids, and that you're feeling a little left out, which may be a normal feeling. But where do you think your kids want to be? It's not a matter they're necessarily choosing the other parent over you. What they're choosing is they'd rather be somewhere fun than being stuck in the city. And that's okay, because I think most people would feel the same way. So I'm trying to say to people here, be mindful of it. And what we said before about agreements is also important, because you also have to be mindful that sometimes someone will contact you and say, okay, our kids are in grade 4 and 2. And if I leave on the first Saturday of the holidays, it's going to cost me $5,000 more than if I leave the day before. And you're thinking, well, what's the big deal? On one hand, you may say, well, I'm going to oppose it because my child shouldn't miss a day of school. Well, really? The day before a holiday for a grade 4 and grade 2 child? Like, really? And no, one day you may be in the exact same position. So if there's a bit of conflict, I would say to my client, make sure you get a consent for something similar. But I would say to people, and I think you like, what would you say to someone in that situation, Anna, who's asked that question?
Again, it really goes back to the to what we were discussing earlier. Put your child at the forefront, and don't do something because it's vindictive. Don't do something because you're trying to hurt the other spouse, and don't do something for your own personal reasons because, as you said, you feel left out or you feel hurt or you wish you were the one there. During a separation, these things come up and life becomes very different than what you're used to. But at the end of the day, it should be about your child. And missing a couple of days at school during non-high peak times, especially in earlier grades, shouldn't be a big problem. And as you mentioned, Andrew, there will be a situation where you may want to take the children out of school during, non-critical periods of their education, and you would want your spouse to also be reasonable in consenting to those arrangements. You've got to still continue to work as a partnership for the sake of your children, whether you guys are together or not. And I think that's a really, really important key point in any separation.
Well, and as I say, and then those things probably happen peacefully most of the time, and then you have the awkward ones like I told you about, or you have some where somebody asks 2 or 3 times to take the child out a day early from school, and one person says yes, and then they say yes, and then they say yes, and then the first time they ask, they get, well, the child shouldn't miss a day of school, and then you start looking at your agreement to say, okay, well, who's responsible for the child on transition times? Is so once the child gets dropped off at school, is that my parenting time or is that my ex's parenting time, is the attitude people look at, because that may be the determining factor of whether you leave the day early or not, providing you have the passport, because the other person may refuse the passport. I mean, there was one bad one I had where one parent was saying, well, I'm not going to let you take that child out of school for that one day. And the other parent said, well, once the child's dropped off at school, according to our agreement, that's my parenting time. So the parent A actually was going to drive the child to school, drop the child off at school. The child was going to go into school, and parent B was then going to go sign the child out of school to go take the child on a trip. And I say that because that's how you don't want things to go, but that's what can happen. And this leads really to the last issue we want to talk about, which is when there is conflict. Anna, what do? Do you go to court?
Well, you try to see if you can negotiate this outside of court. That's always the key. If there's a lawyer on the other side, my preference is to, right away get on the phone with counsel on the other side and see if we can reasonably address this, if they can get some reason into their client. Often it will work, and if we have a knowledgeable, reasonable lawyer on the other side, they'll give their client a call and say, look, this is what this is going to look like. If you're not going to take reasonable positions, there may potentially be costs, there may potentially be issues, let alone the optics of this going forward for any parenting arrangement may be a problem. So they can sometimes resolve this issue, and between counsel, we can get the result that we want. If that is not an option, either because the other side is self-represented or because for whatever reason the lawyer does not agree with your position on the matter, then there's really no other option or choice but to take the matter to court. And at that point, depending on how far away we are from a holiday or from a trip, it may be an urgent motion, which, as I said, are not a lot of fun. Or, if we do have some time, then we schedule a motion in due course, and we go before a judge, and the judge will have that final say. People are going to be spending their money on legal fees at that point, and there potentially may be cost consequences, let alone various other consequences, depending on how court may view the issue. So,
Well, what people really need to understand is it may seem important to you. To the court, it's pretty obvious. Both parents should get equal time. Both parents should be reasonable to one another. And if somebody is being unreasonable because they're mad that the flight may come back at 12:30 a.m. on a certain date instead of 11 o'clock, you're going to lose, because you have to ask yourself, if I was an outsider, would I look reasonable or unreasonable? And if you would look unreasonable, don't spend all the money on lawyers. Don't be cute. I mean, the only other way is if we put in a separation agreement, a dispute resolution provision that either has binding mediation arbitration or binding appointment of a parenting coordinator who can deal with those issues. Those people who have those can usually get a resolution much faster because you're not running to court. You're not worried about the court schedules. You're trying to coordinate through email. It can be as simple as a conference call with your decision maker. And that can be a lot faster. The only thing I'll say is often in relationships, there is one person that really likes the chaos because they use the power and control that they may have over the children and utilize the fact that no one can come to an agreement if they don't believe the other side will ever do anything about it. That's usually the person who will refuse to sign the dispute resolution provision. But when both parties are willing to sign the dispute resolution provision, I think it's a great solution because you're going to get a result for a fraction of the price. What do you think about that, Anne?
oh, absolutely. I personally love that option. There's a few great things, and I know we're not dealing with mediation arbitration in this particular session, but there are a few great things about that. For one, both of you have a choice as to who the decision maker is, so you can look into the person's background, understand their certain views of certain things, and you guys have a choice on that. But it also allows you to get to a resolution or to some sort of a decision much quicker than it would be in court. So I do very much like those clauses. I like having that as an option in a separation agreement. But as you said, both parties have to consent to this. And if one person is very inclined to drive the conflict, they may not be open to that. And that's why it's very, very important that at the time that you are signing these separation agreements, that you also enter into a proper, met arb agreement so that it would be binding at the time that you want to enforce it.
Well, I think that's really good advice to our viewers. And I'd want to say, I hope that this helps some people understand how they should react, how they should respond, and what they should be looking for in an agreement as it pertains to the winter holidays when it comes up. Anna, as always, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I wanted to thank you for being here. If anyone needs assistance in any family law matter, feel free to contact us, or we can be reached at 905-415-1636, or visit us on our website, separation.ca. If you have any requests or show ideas, please send them to info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com. The next Ask Andrew show will be on Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. Got it right, at 12 o'clock noon. And thank you for watching.